Hey everybody, how's it going? So welcome back to another episode of the Top Tips for Realism in Planetcoaster. This is lesson number 7, and today we're talking about nature. So thank you all for coming along. There are no pro and basic tips for this one because nature is nature, but there are quite a few topics to talk about. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, we've been talking about nature throughout the series, but so far, other than the pathing episode, we haven't actually delved into any detail. So parks will tend to split their nature up into 3 areas. So the first you've got is managed gardens, and these are typically your bright and colourful flower beds. These are your planters, you know, your pristine grasses, that sort of thing. And your second is managed shrubbery. Now, this is where the park allows an area to grow naturally, but you would still manage it in some way. You know, they would trim down bushes, they would make sure that it's tidy in appearance and all that sort of stuff. And the final area you've got is wilderness. Now, these are the areas of the park that are completely allowed to overgrow, and they tend to be out of sight of your guests, so it doesn't actually matter that they've overgrown completely. And all of this can be done in Planetcoaster, but where do you even start with that sort of stuff? Well, the first place is the terrain tools that you select in your biome, so let's quickly head out to the main menu so that we can talk about this. So when you're setting up your park, you need to decide what you want your park to look like. You know, where does it live? Where does it live in the world? What kind of climate is it? And that sort of stuff. And you can choose one of the existing biomes. Like, there are some awesome biomes that give you a complete range of terrain paints, but I like to use the custom one so that I can create my own palette. And by using a custom one, you then have these 8 paints that you can then select. So you can select from any of the default biomes and it'll automatically drag them through, and then this will obviously tell you what shape your park is going to be, where your entrance is going to be, etc. You can also do this in the scenario editor, by the way, if you want complete control over where your spawn points are and your entrances and that sort of stuff. You're not locked to the biome and telling you where that is. That's just a side note. So when I'm dealing with my actual terrain, I always go for this UK feel, right? So I always use the UK terrain painting as inspiration. And because I'm now choosing custom, I can swap out the ones that I don't want on here. So, for example, this steep one here, steep 1 as it's called, I might swap it out for the Arctic rock, or I might use another rock. So, for example, I might use the tropical rock, and then I might keep this steep 2 of my own, but what I do like to do is to swap this out for a tarmac. Now, I like to use the studio's tarmac. I just think it feels a little bit better than the city tarmac, and the studio's tarmac also matches the tarmac path. Now, the reason that I swap it out for a tarmac is so that I can do car parks without having to use paths. Because if you use paths in a bigger park, then it adds to the number of calculations that the pathing tool and the AI has to go through, and it sort of has to register whether it's walking area or not. So I'll tend to just paint the terrain rather than use actual pathing. So let's just swap that out. So the next thing I need to do then is select a grass. And I've got 2 grasses already selected, but I'm a bit OCD and I like to do it in a specific order, right? So I'll always choose a first grass, and it depends on the feel of the park that I'm going for. Am I going for UK summer, UK winter, UK autumn? And then I'll base my grass off that. So at the moment, I might choose that I'm using the alpine grass. But if I'm going for a more vibrant UK park, I might choose the deciduous grass instead. That tends to be more native to the UK. But what I then need is an alternative grass, because at some point you're going to want to blend your 2 grasses together, particularly as the terrain paint is one texture right across the entire landscape, right? So you want to vary and mix up the different textures that you're using. So I'll go ahead and select a second grass style. So if I've already got a lush green one, I might choose a leafier one. So I might use the tropical grass from here. Or I might choose a bit more of a vibrant one. So I might then go back to the alpine grass and choose that here. Or I might, well, we've done the deciduous, so I might choose the alpine grass. Now the next thing that we want for this grass is dead grass, because not everything is going to be pristine and perfect, particularly when you're dealing with those wilderness areas. So a dead grass is something that you need. And I then either choose something from the alpine range, like this dead grass here, or this one here. I may also choose something that's from down this range, so I may choose the dry grass from the grassland biome. Now, the next one that I always choose are leaves. So your trees that you're going to be putting in your biome, they're going to be shedding leaves all the time. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, your trees will shed leaves. So it's important to include some kind of leaf detail. Now, I always tend to use this deciduous one. You could get away with using the tropical one if you wanted it to be more fresh looking dropped leaves, but I tend to use the deciduous one here. Next, then I have some kind of flower. So here in the UK we have daisies and dandelions and all sorts that pop up through grass, particularly in the more managed areas rather than the gardening, the highly pruned areas. The areas where the park would just manage it, you tend to have daisies and stuff growing through it. The only real thing that we can do to replicate that in Planetcoaster is by using this alpine grass that's got the flowers in it, the pink flowers. We don't really have any others that we can use, so I would leave that as it is. And then your last one that you've got here is more of a free-for-all. So you now just need to decide what your missing link is. So if you're doing a more coastal kind of park, you may decide that you want a sand. So you would choose a sand paint. If you're going for a more inland or more lakeside kind of park, you may choose something like this, which is a rock stroke mud kind of biome, or paint, should I say. Or you might choose something that's completely muddy. So like you might choose the Arctic mud, or you may go back to something that's along here. We discussed this as part of the grass maybe. So it's a bit of a free-for-all. This is your wild card piece. Now I would, it depends on whether I'm doing it as a beach or as inland as to whether I would choose this mud or whether I choose this sand. So let's just go for mud. So now that we've selected our biome, let's head into it and see how we then create our 3 different areas. So we've come back into our demo park then, and you can see that some of the terrain in the background has already changed. Now that's only because I've gone back to the main menu and changed it out. The game then just swaps out all of the pre-coded terrain paints with all of the ones that I've selected, and those are all now down here. But that's okay though, because we're going to be painting over them as we go along anyway, so it doesn't matter what the base terrain is. We're going to come in and change it as we go along, so it's no panic there at all. So when you are starting your park, what you need to do is decide what is native to your park, what nature is native to your park, and then start to build a palette for that. So what I mean by that is you've got all of this selection in your scenery tab, and under your nature tab, you have all of this stuff that you can choose from, but you have to understand what's natural to the environment of the park that you're building. So what you have to remember is that green exists everywhere, and green will be your primary colour. And parks will make an effort to put colour in areas of high traffic and high footfall. So you'll tend to find really colourful flowers where you've got these high traffic through areas. But the mistake that some people make is that they forget to put the colour elsewhere. So they'll just focus on where the guests are and forget the colour elsewhere. But remember that colour exists in nature. Flowers will grow wherever they will grow. So even in your managed areas that we were talking about over here, you're still going to get an element of colour. Even in your wilderness area that's allowing it to overgrow, you're still going to get an element of colour. So just remember that when you're dealing with your palette. So what I like to do is decide in advance what trees are going to be native to the park that I'm going to have, and then what's going to be deliberately placed because of theming. And likewise with the colour themes. So I need to decide what colours are native to the park. So if I'm in a UK-based climate, you'll tend to find things like blues and yellows and very rich nature colours. But if I'm in a warmer climate, I may choose fiery colours, so reds, oranges, particularly bright yellows. Or if I'm in a more Arctic or winter style biome, then I would tend to use more muted colours, purples and light blues dark blues and that kind of thing. So you just need to decide what's natural in the area of the park that you're building, and then start to build out your palette. So I'll tend to use for a UK based park, so I don't know about any other bios, I'm afraid. I'm sure videos of the likes of Mike Sheets, who are the professional gardeners, are far more superior in terms of telling you what to use out there. I can only tell you what I do for here in the UK. So I tend to use the ash tree. We tend to have ash trees here in the UK quite a lot. And I do like to use both of the ash trees. So This would be the first thing that I would select. I then also use the beech trees. These are also native quite nicely to the UK, and I also tend to use the oak, as you've seen in the background, the oak tree. So I've decided that these would be my 3 traditional trees. Now in Reigate Lake, you would have also seen me using the kapok tree. And you'll also have seen me using the Brazil nut tree. Should we just turn the align off? And the reason that I use these 2 trees is because they are far richer. They offer far more canopy and much more shade than the oak tree. And sometimes you can disguise them as being another tree. So sometimes what you may find is that I will hide one tree inside another, like this. Hang on, let's just turn the spacebar, turn the angle snap off. So I'll hide a tree inside the other, and then it just sort of fleshes it out, and then you just have to find a way of hiding it inside, like that. And then you've got a bit more depth to your trees. Or what I then also may do is take one tree, copy it, and then I will place another one after I've rotated it slightly, and this just creates, again, a bit more of a depth to the tree. And then it's no longer a kapok tree, it's a different tree. And then I'll just then maybe sink it into the ground so that it's not so tall so that the trunk isn't so tall off the ground. And especially if you're using things like flower beds and stuff to hide this, this tends to create this awesome piece of shade, and it no longer looks like a non-native tree, right? It looks like it's just another ash tree or another beech tree by doing that. And then I do the same with the Brazil nut tree as well. So I will take the Brazil nut tree, I'll sink it right into the ground like so, and then I will copy it, rotate it, and sink it in again, and then just align up the trunk like so. And then you just end up with a much richer tree. Now on the workshop, you can also get trees that people have pulled together where they've created them using the deadwood branches. So they'll take a deadwood trunk, and they will then use something like this bush to then start to flesh it out and become a different tree. Obviously they take far more care over this than I do. Absolutely fine to use those, but just know that in a bigger park it's going to really start to drag down your frame rate. And there are some awesome trees out there, by the way, that on the workshop, so feel free to go and check those out and use those. They do exist. They are awesome. So the next thing then, once I've chosen my trees, I need to choose my flower palette. Now, we are quite limited with the flowers that we can use in Planetcoaster, unlike the likes of Planet Zoo that's got an absolute plethora of nature and flowers and everything that you can use. Planetcoaster is a bit more limited with what you can do, but that doesn't stop you from being any less creative. So for a UK park, I'll tend to use the Narcissus flower, which I can never actually say properly. So I'll tend to use pads, as you've seen already, pads of these. Obviously I don't put them down in a grid like this, that's very obvious, but I also like to use this one because you also have a smaller batch as well, so you can actually create little pads of flowers as well as being able to cross over and make them more believable. Remember that in nature, randomness is your friend. So not everything is going to be the same height, not everything is going to be the same size, not everything is going to be in the same order. Remember that for it to look natural, it has to be completely random. So I've chosen that as my first flower. The next flower I tend to use would be the yellow flower, but now I need to choose colours for it. So I don't want to keep this as yellow because that's what comes in game. So here in the UK, I might actually change this to a different colour, blue. So I just come into my blue palette and I might choose a slightly richer blue. Sink that slightly into the ground, and then we have ourselves a blue. Then I also like to use the roses as well. So again, from a distance, the roses don't always look like roses. They could look like any other flower species. So I tend to keep them red normally, just a bit of a dapple of colour, but in this instance you might actually choose to have them again like a purpley colour. So let's just choose the purple. There we go. And it's now looking a bit more vibrant. Or you may choose then to have this, I don't know, an orangey colour. There we go. And then from a distance, it's now looking like a completely different flower type again. Then we need some undergrowth. So I tend to use the Scaviola as undergrowth because you can sink this into the ground and it creates almost like long bits of grass that you can't always achieve. So let's go ahead and place those down. Then I will also tend to use where is it? This one here, the green leafy bush as it's called, because this creates the ability to have tufts of grass growing out of places. So at the bottom of trees, for example, you may find tufts of grass, or in amongst flowers you may find tufts of grass like this. So you can then just start to pull this out. And then lastly, I like to use the creosote bush of varying different degrees. You'd have seen me do this in Reigate Lake. Now, why use this? It looks awful, right? Well, remember that nature dies. Not everything is going to be perfect and pruned. So if you combine this with other stuff, for example, if I put this in amongst here, for example, and then start to copy, I think it's going to let me do it. Let me do this the hard way. Let me get the blue, and then sink this in. You can now see that you're starting to get some dead stuff coming through, and I'm hoping now you're starting to make the connection between what would be the ridiculously pruned areas where the gardeners look after versus the complete wilderness. This is where you're going to start to make those connections. So once I've chosen this as a general palette, I then may have what I call show off flowers. You know, the flowers that are used by the park to show off. And this would typically be the petunia. And again, you can choose your colours wisely. Now, I tend to use these as path liners. I don't tend to use these in any kind of flower beds or stuff. These are the things that you put beside paths to really truly show off. And also your miniature conifers do an awesome job at lining paths as well. Just because they look really, really cool. And lastly, don't forget about your topiaries. So your topiaries, they are pruned to the max. Your gardeners will look after these, but you can create some really awesome lines with them. So always remember your topiaries, but you use those sparingly. You use those in areas typically where you're trying to hide lines between paths and areas behind. You use them where you don't want to use a fence. It's the best place to use a topiary. So we've created all of this as a palette for my park. You're not tied to that palette. Remember that if your theming or your area feel demands it, then absolutely go ahead and use something different. So if it comes to using a birch tree, great, go for it. If you're wanting a more alpine wooded feel, then you can start to use those more alpine trees. And I'm trying to remember which one it is off the top of my head. This one here, the Pandososa, I can't say it. So this would be your more typical alpine type tree. So you get the idea, right? So you need to choose the trees and the plants for your biome, and then lastly find out how this is going to work with your terrain texture. So I'm just going to take my terrain, no, I'm not going to my terrain paint. I'm going to lower my intensity, and I'm also going to lower my brush size as well. And now I'm just going to have a look and start playing about with looks and feels and to what I'm comfortable doing. So remembering that I've got sheer grass at the moment, my grass is not going to grow in complete patches. So I'm going to want to periodically change the grass colour like this. So you can now see that we're starting to get 2 tones worth of grass, which is looking pretty much all right. Remember, underneath all of your trees, you need to have leaves and stuff because the leaves are going to be falling off. So we just need to dapple out some kind of leaf growth off the bottom of your trees, like so. Remember that in amongst all of your grass, you're going to have flowers. So I've just chosen my flowers. I'm just going to dapple these around. And I always use this to accent and bring out any flowers that I'm already placing down, right? So I just do that kind of effect. And then remember as well that your grass is going to be worn down in areas, and your grass is going to struggle under trees where you have a lot of canopy, a lot of shadow and shade. So just start to wear out your grass around these kind of areas, but don't go overboard. So like this over here, I've just gone overboard. So all I'll then do is I'll just come back and just replace some of it, just so it's got an accent of it struggling. So that's the basic principles behind everything. Let's go ahead. Let's have a look at some other bits within the park that we need to do to consider for realism. So we've just spent a while building a palette and talking about the theory behind it, but I think it's probably time we actually put that into practice, right? So let's have a look at this entire plaza and start to pull it apart. Now let's start with the pruned areas, the ones that the gardeners are going to upkeep, the ones that the park are going to spend the effort on. So remember, the first rule of nature is random. Everything in nature needs to be random. Second rule, nothing is flat. So we've already kind of started to accent this in here, but that was purely to hide some of the unsightly janky lines that we were creating with the mud that we had here. So first things first, nothing in nature is static. It all needs to be random. So let's go ahead and take our terrain. We're going to have it on a low intensity and on a low size. No, do you know what? A slightly higher size. Let's go for a 7 or an 8 meter. And I'm just going to auto paint. I'm just going to raise the terrain slightly. There we go. I'm just going to do this. And the idea that we're going through here is that from the guest's sightline, this terrain is no longer flat. And sometimes you can use terrain really effectively to hide things that you don't want a guest to see behind. But next time you're out on a walk, have a look around you, especially if you're in an open area. Like nothing is flat. Even on a beautifully landscaped lawn of a park or a city centre park, that still won't be flat. So just go and have a look. Now, you can see on here that this is already painting down that leaf terrain, and you're probably thinking, why is it doing that? I don't like that. And that's fine. That's only because the game thinks that the default terrain on this is actually the leaf one. If I want to change that, I can. All I need to do is come down to my options here, go to use selected, go to my painting, and choose one of the grasses. And now when I change the terrain, you'll now see that it's now painting the grass instead. So don't panic. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue my tirade against terrain, against the path. And you don't want to make it too obvious, by the way. So you don't want to be sort of getting into the realms of going high intensity. Here's a hill. Yeah. So we want to make it subtle. We want it to be undulating more than we do anything else. And how subtle you make this is completely up to you, by the way. But you can see now that we're starting to get that nice effect. Nothing is random. It's not static. It's not flat. It's not uniform. It's great, but it's probably still a little bit too untidy. So all I do now is I take my smooth tool, I really increase the size, but I now decrease the intensity slightly because we don't want to undo everything that we've just done, right? So I probably take it about 12 meters and about 10%. And all I now do is just go over the area that I've done like this, just to smooth out some of those unsightly janky edges without taking away some of the undulation that we've done. So there we go. We can now see here that we've got slightly higher here and it's slightly lower here, and I like that. That's good. So the next thing we need to do then is to think about what sits underneath all of our flowers. So even though we may have these beautiful flower beds that's sitting on the top, underneath it's still not going to be uniform. So we still need to deal with what's going on underneath that flower bed. So just like we did before, I'm going to take different textures and I'm just going to paint them on. So I'm going to just bring my size back down a little bit. I'm going to say, right, underneath all of this there's going to be dirt. So I'm just going to take the dirt. I'm just going to dapple some of this out. Now, this is probably a little too much now. but I can correct that by using the other grass. So I'm just going to do the other grass like this. And then underneath that, we're going to have leaves because our flowers are still going to shed, or it may be mulch that's underneath. So I'm just going to start to bring in the accent of the leaves like this. Okay. And then to accent the rest of the flowers, I'm just going to give it this small flowers. Now these are really subtle, like you can see that it's only adding it in really small patches, and that's absolutely fine because again it doesn't grow uniformly. Just let the terrain paint do what it needs to do, like so. And then you may also then decide, actually this is now looking a little bit too pasty, this is now looking a little bit too drawn, so we just go back to our original grass and we just undo some of what we've done, and then that just corrects it like that. So now you can see that we haven't gone heavy on the terrain paint, we've just done this not really bold attempt, but it now gives us a really nice base for us to start our flower displays. So we already know what we're using the narcissus. So I may take this and place them down. And again, you take far more care when you're doing nature than I am here. I'm just literally demonstrating how we put it down. You may take all of your conifers and bring them along here. You may decide to bring in the begonias, which is absolutely fine. So you just choose your colour. So I reckon for this one we're going to want it to be a bit of a pink colour. Probably not as vibrant. Let's wash it out a little bit. There we go. That's a bit better. And then I start to mix this in amongst all of the other flowers as well, just to give it a bit of colour. And then what I'll do is I'll take either the roses, I'll sink that in and change the colour again. So let's use this as the yellow that we had. No, we've already got yellow. Let's do the blue. So we've got blue. And I'll sink it right down because we don't want it to overpower our display, right? We don't want it to be obvious. So I'll just go, there we go, and just accent that. And what you've now got is this highly pruned area that looks awful because I'm not a designer, right? I would take far more care to do it. But you're starting to get the idea of how you can mix and match those colours and how they would sit in nature. Now, if you're wanting to be completely lazy, I completely get it. There's a cheat that you can do when you come to doing your flower beds, so you don't have to place them one by one if you don't want to. Particularly if you're using things like the begonias, because they are a set size, right? So you tend to put them down in this kind of format, and you can't get them to look random. You can't get them to look good, like no matter how much you flip them. I mean, yeah, it's great if you're doing that managed bit and you can hide this edge, you can kind of get away with it. But there's another way that you can achieve it and achieve something very similar. If you go into the wall climbers, you've got these climbing roses, and I think you probably might know where this is going. So if you lay down the climbing roses onto the floor and have them all at the same or similar height but rotate them, you can now create complete beds of flowers without actually having to lay them down one by one. And you can see it's still creating the randomness. If I just try that again, it's still creating the randomness that you would find in nature, but you're now not having to place them down one by one, and you haven't got to do that fine placement. And of course, you've got different shapes that you can use, and these can all be different colors. So if I do a yellow, blue and a purple, I can then dapple these in like this and like this, and I've got a climbing one which is a different shape again. So let's just change the colors out for a white, a red, and I'm choosing these colours at random now. This is not conforming to the to the palette that we created. Let's not use red because we're already using red quite a lot. Let's actually make it a green. And so there you go. You can start to place those down, and you end up here. And again, it's now up to you as to whether you do anything with these. So you can flesh them out a little bit better with your where's it gone? Your green leafy bush. So it's not completely flowers, like so. And now you've got bits of overgrowth that are coming through. So if you're wanting an area to look a little bit older and not so pruned, you can start to use those bushes to really draw it out. And now we just add some trees. So add a tree here, and then we're going to add a birch tree. Now remember here, when you're placing trees, if you're dealing with an area like this, it doesn't make sense for your trees to fight for sunlight and fight for soil. So they would be pretty sparse. We're not dealing with woodland. We're not dealing with, masses of trees. So if you are going to have a massive oak tree, it doesn't make sense to place your oak tree here because it's going to really drown out the other two trees, and you're then also creating a bit of you're strangling your area. So you want to sort of place your oak trees so it enhances the sight line, maybe like there, for example. And then once you've placed it, don't forget your terrain around it, like so. So just going to edit the terrain slightly so it's not flat anymore. Do your terrain paint. So remember, it's going to be shedding leaves. And underneath, then it's going to start to struggle. But maybe I'm going to put some of that grass back so it's not struggling as much. And then, of course, flowers around it will grow. And then remember that your grass is not going to sit nicely up towards here. So we want some kind of overgrowth. So I'm just going to put this in like so. And also remember that when it comes to your other trees, just needs to poke out of the top. It doesn't need to be anything major. Now we just need to remember that flowers will still grow in nature. So we go ahead and we choose something. So I might choose the narcissus flowers again. And I might just then dapple them around just in random areas. And I might then just make some newly growing and some more mature, just to give it a bit of sight. Actually, these have poked out of the ground, so let's just move those down. There we go. And so now, if I'm then starting to deal with this being an area that's no longer pruned, but it's now an area of extra growth, I then might start to think about using my creosote bush, sinking it right the way down, just creating some shrub. There we go, like that. And then if you're really wanting to go all out, I'll take the wall climber. No, I don't, sorry. I take the where is it? Oh no, where is it? This one, Scaviola. And again, I'll sink that down into the ground, probably a bit further, and I'll just dapple this around very sparingly, but just enough for it to be noticeable. And the idea behind that is it creates slightly longer bits of grass, because unlike Planet Zoo, where we've got some really awesome textures that we can use in terrain paint, for Planetcoaster we kind of have to make it up as we go along. So I'm just going to raise it out slightly, and then just dapple this around. Like so. And there you have it. So now you've got a bit of a natural sight line where we've got something a bit more managed in the front. Like I say, you'll take far more effort. And in the background we've got something a little bit more overgrown. So let me just go off camera and fix some of this up, and I'll show you what you can actually properly achieve. Alright, so I've just used all of those techniques just to do some tidying up and everything in this area, but also prepare you for our next topic of conversation. So we've already talked about nature being completely random. So all I've done is I've randomized all of the flowers and put a bit of shrubbery in and made it look a bit more messy. Now the reason that I've done that is because obviously flowers will overgrow. So if you're going for that more overgrown feature, then by all means go ahead. And it's also to introduce you to the fact that there's a few secret sneaky tips that you can use to trick the eye into thinking that nature is better than it really is. So we've got all of these forest bushes. They can all be sunk into the ground and you can create little clusters. So whereas before we've been using our smaller bush, where is our smaller bush? There we go. Our small leafy bush to create more leafy kind of grassy overshoots. You can now start using green bushes and mixing them together with the two different green palettes that you've got to then start to bring that together. And don't forget your terrain paint and your terrain paint, and of course your terrain paint. So don't forget to paint around it just to give it your overgrowth. But remember as well that nature doesn't respect boundaries in any way, shape or form. So the reason that I wanted to do this overgrown is to show you that it's absolutely fine for your flowers to overshoot anywhere that you've got boundaries, because nature won't respect that. It doesn't know that you don't want flowers overgrowing the curb. And unless your gardeners have come along to create that, to maintain that, your flowers are going to do that. They're going to grow wherever they've got space to do, and wherever there's sunlight and food and whatever. So just don't be afraid to let all of your overgrowth grow over. That's the whole idea. But also remember that it's not just your flower beds that this happens. We've dappled on it underneath the trees and we've already got that overgrowth. But don't forget that around signs and posts, if you're wanting that overgrown effect, don't forget to do that around here as well. So don't forget that you've got your creosote that you can use. And again, you're not tied to the one. You can use any of the creosotes. Sometimes I like to use the yellow one actually because it's got a flower to it and you're tied to having it yellow. Just gives it that little bit of depth. You would have seen me use this in the rapids over at Reigate Lake. So it gives you the ability to have both flowers and dead at the same time. And remember as well that it's going to grow wherever you've got the inability to maintain it. So all of these supports, you may find that there's going to be some kind of overgrowth, and this is now where you really test your patience as to how much an extreme you go, because you're going to have dead stuff underneath the track, right? Nature's going to struggle wherever the track is close to the ground. You're also going to get elements where you're going to have grass popping up through. It's not going to be everywhere, so you don't have to do every single support, but you do just need to have it represented in some way. Your janitors are not going to be able to get underneath here to do the mowing of the grass and stuff. It may be an annual maintenance thing that gets done when the ride is closed, and you don't have to place them down one by one. This is where you can start using your bushes. So your bushes give you a bigger remit. And it's absolutely fine to hide your supports, of course. Growth doesn't respect boundaries. So I'm just going to do that kind of area. So now we've got this overgrowth. And you would have seen everybody do this, but remember that you can also sink trees into the ground for bigger areas as well. So let me just show you this over this way. So if these bushes that I've been using before aren't big enough, then I can just use a tree and just sink that into the ground, rotate it round, sink that into the ground, keep rotating, change out the tree so we've got slightly different shapes, like so, and then change out again, slightly different shapes again. So this one I probably want about there. I could marry that up with an actual tree, so we've now got a bush around a tree. Or if you wanted to go really extreme, you can just put the tree in the ground. It creates different bushes. So if I then do this and do this kind of effect, this is where you're now starting to create your wilderness areas. So you would have seen me doing this in Reigate Lake around the rapids when I was building the woods area. Then I might take a different tree. So this time I'm going to introduce the sycamore, just because they're quite similar to the other bushes, right? They're just slightly wider, got a wider dome to it. So I might just put those down there, for example. Now let me go ahead and reintroduce my oak trees. Actually, I'm not going to do two big ones side by side. I'm going to do a medium one, because obviously not everything is a uniform size, right? So now I'm starting to create like a real dense woodland, but it's still going to die, so we still need to put in our creosote. So let's go ahead and just put some roughage in. Let's just go and do roughage, different height. Actually, that's probably too much. Just go, there we go. And then one in there. One in here. One in here. Okay, so we're starting to give this idea that there are going to be dead patches. There's also going to be colour. Remember that nature still survives, colour still survives. So I'm just going to take our one that we can't pronounce and just dapple them around in just random places, remembering to rotate as you place them and where you feel fit. Change your height. And change here, and this is where we then go back to our palette. So we're going to take our yellow floral, but actually make it the blue that we selected. And again, the color will exist. Bluebells, for example, in the middle of spring in the UK are absolutely beautiful. So this kind of would give that bluebell effect. There we go, like so. Don't forget your undergrowth, and this is where you'll see me talking about this quite a lot through all of the series of going, it's that subliminal level. So even though you might not see it, it might not be obvious to the eye, you notice when it's not there. So for example, this one now is going to create some kind of forest floor layer, so you don't even know that it's missing at the moment, but it's not until you actually place it that you realize that it's there. You see? So now it's starting to create that floor layer. This is really overgrown. Like this is proper wilderness. This is wilderness to the max. And then I might just then finally finish it off with just another splash of colour. But that's probably a bit too much yellow actually. Let's make it, no, that's blue. Let's make it that purple, yellow and white. That's better. I'm just going to sparingly use this around and about like so. And there you go. You're pretty sorted with a woodland theme. All I then need to do is just come along and make sure that my terrain paint is all sorted, because you are still going to have gaps where you can see the floor. So you just want to make sure that you're accenting your terrain paint properly. But the reason that I've done the terrain paint, by the way, last on here but first elsewhere, is because I always had an intention to cover most of the land here, so I wouldn't want to do the terrain paint and then place everything on. I want to make sure that my terrain paint is supporting what I've built in terms of overgrowth, if that makes sense. So whilst I'm on the subject of terrain paint then, we're going to come back to our ride, because not only is this going to have some kind of undergrowth and everything, don't forget that your rides will make your grass struggle to grow. So I'm going to take my rock here, which is pretty much, no, sorry, I'm going to take my dead grass here. I'm going to take the brush size down. I'm just going to paint an area underneath everywhere that the coaster nearly touches the ground, like so, and like so. And have we got anywhere else? Yep, around here, like so. I'm then also just going to do some of the flowers, just because where there's not grass, it gives those flowers a chance for growth. And then around here, like so. And then just touch around here. Then I'm going to take some leaves, because we would have trees. Like that. We've battled with the autosave for the first time this series. Great. And then I just continue that process. And then I start to use all of the techniques that I've been using elsewhere in terms of placing down flowers and everything, just to make that all right. And don't forget rocks. Rocks are also important. This is the final thing that we haven't really spoken about in any of these, and I've deliberately left it until last whilst I've got some scenes to actually show you. So you would have chosen what rocks you had as part of your palette. I always tend to use the deciduous rocks regardless, because they tend to be more closely representative of UK, but you can use whatever rocks you like. And then all I will then do is just to start dappling these around, really sparingly, unless you're intending to place them down. So like if you've got a really heavily themed area that requires a lot of rock work, then go ahead, fill your boots with rocks. But in the UK we tend to not have many rocks, particularly in the overgrowth areas, and in the forest it's too busy growing. But still, stupid thing to say, but still place them sort of sparingly, and don't forget to swap out your rocks as well. Different sizes, different shapes, and remember that you can also free rotate them, so that you can have them in any shape and any combination that you like. So guys, I really do hope that you found this even remotely entertaining, and me waffling on for this long. I hope you've actually got to the end. So thank you for sticking around. Like I say, I hope you found this really interesting. The next episodes are going to be coming. We're going to be looking at things like car parks and hotels and stuff, to extend the park even further. So if you want to know when those episodes are coming, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel. If you like what you see, make sure you leave a comment down below, leave a like, or come and have a chat. We like a chat. But of course, as you already know, until we speak again, please take care and look after yourselves. Bye-bye.